Let's watch a CNN panel as they spar over vaccines and their efficacy as RFK Jr. and Trump have now gone mask off to their base and revealed that they fooled them as they swore it was only COVID vaccines that they hated and would go after, and now it's all vaccines that come in front of them, namely the polio vaccine. For this video, as RFK Jr.'s lawyer has already requested to put it on hold, so let's see what's being said and we can jump right back in.
Right now, we have a very difficult situation when we have politicians going against what's settled science. And we really have to think about what is the way that we could have quality communication, that people understand what vaccines are good for and why they should take them. And we have to figure out a way that get the science out in front of the people, not necessarily the politics in front of the people.
This is really dangerous, Pete. I mean, I don't understand why there isn't more outcry over this on Capitol Hill, but I will read this from Senator Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate leader, and he is a survivor of polio. He says anyone seeking the Senate's consent to serve in the incoming administration would do well to steer clear of even the appearance of association with such efforts.
What the gullible base of MAGA doesn't understand is that Republicans had long been losing the discourse in politics on all fronts. Statistically, they are worse on the economy. America no longer agrees with their stance on most social issues like gay marriage, racial issues. So they had to find a way to make new issues to argue about. This is where the culture war issues came from. And one of the other main ways they chose to do that was this battle against intellectualism, where they now question science, they question facts, they question professionals, degrees, and they instead value like relatability and real world experience, which is really stupid. It's one thing to question science with other science, right? I mean, that's like how you do science, right? But then they're trying to question science with the opinion of politicians like RFK Jr., who don't have any experience or qualifications in the field or know what they're talking about. They're just going off vibes here, and they like the politician's vibes more than the professional because, I don't know, like relatability or something like that. They come off as like everyman. I don't know. And after Going after mandates like polio or measles is dangerous because we also see the huge benefit in requiring them, and since we've administered them on a mass level, which we'll discuss after this next clip.
Anyone who tries to suggest falsely that vaccines are should be eliminated essentially for children in this country shouldn't serve in a health post in the government. I'm not sure why it didn't go that next step.
Well, I think RFK Jr. needs to immediately disavow any move towards getting rid of the polio vaccine, number one.
What about his own comments?
But number two, Donald Trump has not said that he wants to get rid of the polio vaccine.
To be clear here, Trump's words on the matter is, I will remove funding from any school with vaccine mandates, and I will remove or pull any vaccine that I deem dangerous, where he's also shown a willingness to go against science as he did with the COVID vaccine. So it's like what he deems dangerous is pretty arbitrary. Science, going against the science on the COVID vaccine, by the way, science in which he himself touted when he thought that he would be able to get credit for the one good thing that he did do as president, which was Operation Warp Speed, where he trusted the science and got the vaccine rollout started before he then had to reverse course because it would make his base boo them because they hate their conspiracy theorists and hate vaccines. And all Trump cares about is winning votes. So his positions are determined by what his base wants them to be. But yeah, I mean, anyone trying to threaten vaccines for children should be instantly disqualified from a leading health role in America. This shouldn't even be a controversial position to hold. I mean, this obsession with trying to make RFK Jr. disavow it is weird too, because he's dedicated his entire life to this. Just because he in one hearing will say, okay, yeah, I won't do it, or I don't believe it anymore, like so he can get a position, doesn't mean we should then trust him. This should be wholly disqualifying. And we know that what he's saying is dangerous because if we look at mortality from polio, it went down after vaccine campaigns, and that vaccinating infants has lowered infant mortality from disease by almost 50%. This is something the pro-life side should love, but apparently the pro-life side doesn't care about it.
The bigger picture here is the American people they have a bias against expertise, unfortunately. They have a bias against credible peer-reviewed data because they have felt misled and mistreated by the government. And so you almost hit on it there. It's anecdote. That is what drives decision-making for Americans right now. It's kind of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they hear, the cousins, sisters, nephews, uncles didn't get a disease and they were unvaccinated. Well, it's good enough for me. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the reality of the situation.
He is spot on here in his analysis, and it's a sad reality, right? Because anecdotes will never be data, and they'll never be reliable in terms of like what's actually happening or the picture on a macro level. And here's an easy example I can paint for you to show that. If I walk outside and look around and the world looks flat if you just look at it, right? And I'm like, the world looks flat, so it must be flat. It would make sense to me because in my personal experience, that's how it looked. That's how it seemed. So that's what I believe. Now, if I use that to go and convince even 100,000 other people, like, hey, the world looks flat, so it must be flat, and they all agree, 100,000 of us, it doesn't make it right. It's through this objective analysis of empirical data, historical precedents, and statistical realities that we could then come to the factual conclusion that, hey, the world is not flat, which is why studies, data, evidence, these things will always trump one's personal experience, because they have methods in them that are meant to remove the bias that will always be present in anecdotes, whether consciously or subconsciously. But now it's like, let's just believe Trump, right? That's where America is at now. And it's, again, largely because of this battle against intellectualism, where now they trust someone like Donald Trump or RFK Jr. over a career doctor or health professional because, they're woke or something. And it's like, you even hear it nowadays. People will be like, well, I didn't get vaccinated and I'm still alive, or I didn't get the vaccine and I never got COVID. Like, no, okay, good for you. There's also people who didn't take the vaccine and died because of COVID, a brutal death. Like, let's go with the data instead of personal anecdotes, because there's going to be anecdotes on every side of the spectrum. And the craziest part here is that all of this nonsense that was like made political because in 2020, they had to have some way to deal with this. It's given the anti-vax crazies a platform where they had been successfully pushed out of our discourse a long time ago in terms of politics. But now, the conspiratorial nature of MAGA allowed them back in. And then with the rise of COVID denialism, it allowed for them to take the forefront and to kind of push the limits, push the mold, where now our director of human and health services is trying to question vaccines like the polio vaccines, which have long settled science in terms of the benefits they provide. Like, what are we doing here?